You are watching original video by Truthdig.com. For more information and resources, visit us on the web at www.truthdig.com.
Hello and welcome to Live at Truthdig. I'm your host, Sarah Wesley, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Cenk Uygur. He is the co-founder and host of the online progressive news network, the Young Turks. He's openly critical about the influence of money in politics. He also condemns Donald Trump on the regular, and he's here to talk about his new political movement, the Justice Democrats. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cenk.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're also joined by our deputy editor, Kasha Anderson, and our editor-in-chief, Robert Scheer. Cenk Uygur has started the Young Turks. Actually, you celebrated the 15th anniversary, I heard.
That's right.
Last week, was it?
No, on Tuesday.
Valentine's Day.
That's
Valentine's
right.
Day.
We started on February 14, 2002. That was the first day that Sirius Satellite Radio came on air. We were their first original talk show before Howard Stern. And we started as a radio show. Then we started online video in 2005. We did a little bit of TV, but mainly the heart of our enterprise is online.
Great. And from what I've heard, you're very open about your criticisms of Donald Trump, a lot of political commentary and frustration with the Democratic Party. So we're here to discuss that. And because of your disillusionment with the Democratic Party, you've teamed up with a couple other people, including Bernie Sanders, leaders of the campaign this past election, and have launched a new political movement called the Justice Democrats. So let's get right into it. You've been very open about the Democratic Party and your criticisms. And so I wanted to know what inspired this new political movement? What was the turning point where you said it's time for this movement?
Yeah. So the Democratic Party for a very long time has needed a real progressive wing that was not beholden to corporate donors. But this election was certainly the straw that broke the camel's back. So let's review the disaster that is the Democratic Party. First, let's note that they have a significant demographic advantage. They also have an advantage on almost every single policy issue, according to the polling, not our opinion, but the polling of American people. And they took those giant advantages, and with that, they have lost the House, the Senate, the White House to a monster who was the least popular person to ever run for president of the United States of America. On the day of the election, he only had a 37% approval rating, and they lost to him anyway. Then they've lost the Supreme Court, even though they could have picked a Supreme Court justice and had a whole year to do it. And then they lost 69 out of 99 state legislatures. It is hard for a party to be this pathetic and this miserable. Now, there's a very good reason for it, because we think, well, that is, oh my God, what an unbelievable failure. But it's not actually. That's actually exactly what they're paid to do. Here's what I mean by that. The donors have set up a system where all of the candidates are beholden to them. The person with more money wins 95% of the time in congressional elections, as an example. So what are they going to do? They're all going to serve their private financiers of these elections, these donors. And what do the donors want? They want really strong right-wingers to push for tax cuts and deregulation. And the part that everybody leaves out, they want really weak Democrats to go, oh, God, dear golly, gee, there was nothing we could do. I mean, I put up a Supreme Court justice, and then for a year I didn't do anything about it. Golly, gee, there was nothing I could do. George Bush made these tax cuts, but he couldn't make them permanent. But as a Democratic president, I made 94% of the revenue from those tax cuts permanent for billionaires, millionaires, corporations. Golly gee, there was nothing I could do. So on policy issues and in a lot of ways in electoral matters, the Democrats are the party paid to lose by the donors.
Can I just interrupt you for a minute? You live in California, right?
Yes.
And you broadcast from here. And the big exception for the Democrats is California's Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
And actually our governor, the second coming of Jerry, as my wife Narda Zucchino has just written a terrific book on all this, quotes him as when he ran against Bill Clinton, and the choice was the Republican or Democrat, he says it's the choice of two lessers. And so he was on this even the first time he was running. And I think if we look at California, It's deep blue, not because it's sold out, not because it was beholden to Wall Street, not because it went the route you went, but it said, hey, there is room for progressives. We can challenge Pete Wilson on immigration very aggressively on 187. We can care about poor people. We can care about diversity. And not to, whitewash California, but the success of the Democratic Party in California is the exception for the nation. The thing that's lousy about East Coast journalism and why I'm so happy you're operating from here is they've ignored it. They basically have ignored it. They're in that triangle, and they have not stopped to say, hey, why is California so different? Wasn't always. California gave the country Ronald Reagan, right? California had the John Birch Society and everything. So how come California went the other way? And since you live here and operate here, I would like to ask you your wisdom on that.
Well, so there's a couple of factors here. So first off, it's not quite as clean as that because on the national level for the California representatives, they're not altogether that much better than the national average. Dianne Feinstein is not what I would call a progressive. So, and does she take her donors into account? Definitely.
Well, she's one of them. Her husband's one of the richer people.
Right, and Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff, and I can go on and on. But at the state level, yes, there's this interesting dynamic where progressives have fought back and realized, hey, there's success in that, and that actually the voters are very receptive to it. But we have such a huge demographic advantage and policy advantage in California that it's a little bit easier. You might be a better expert on that than I am. Not might, I'm almost positive you are. but I love what you're doing in terms of separating out the different parts of the Democratic Party and what led to success and what didn't.
Well, I'm trying to back what I think you're doing. I'm a fan of your show, what you do, and I've been on it. And I think there's two narratives now. One is sell out. That's the Democratic sellout. Let's get cozier with Wall Street. Let's show we're great mainstream, blah, blah, blah. And go in for red baiting, the new thing, and be very hawkish and start wars and rely on the CIA and the FBI to pick our leader. That's the Democratic Party that scares the heck out of me. But in California, and I think because we do have local progressive Democrats, they've been active, this went from being a red state to a blue state. Everybody forgets that.
Yep.
And so what I'm arguing for, I think, is what you are here to suggest, is that there's a progressive alternative for the Democratic Party that is also a winning strategy. And after all, Bernie Sanders did carry the very voters that they needed to defeat Donald Trump.
That's absolutely right. So let me say at least one more thing about that. So when you talk about a strong progressive Democratic Party, and that's what we're trying to do. So we launched Justice Democrats, as you pointed out. That's justicedemocrats.com, and we're asking for nominations of people to run, real Americans to run against Democrats in the primaries and eventually Republicans in the general election. You look at history. So between 1940 and 1980, roughly, we had an incredibly strong progressive Democratic Party. So of course you can go back further with FDR and all of his campaigns. And so throughout that time we got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These are not only enormously successful programs, but the most popular programs in the country. We got the Great Society. But more importantly, or interestingly, progressives and the Democratic Party were so strong in the 1970s that they got Richard Nixon to pass the EPA and OSHA. That is unbelievable. So the idea that progressives are by their nature hard to focus and they're weak is not remotely true. They were so strong for decades and decades. So what's the difference? Well, in 1976 and 1978, there was two Supreme Court decisions, well before Citizens United, that says that corporations have the right to give money to politicians, and we will call that speech. So from then on, the Democratic Party becomes just as corporate and just as bought as the Republican Party, and then it becomes the weak, feckless, miserable party that it is now. So the idea we have is, we'll stop taking that corporate money. So if you're a Justice Democrat, you're not allowed to take corporate money, you're not allowed to take the super PAC money, and you're not allowed to take big donor money. The rest of the platform is wonderful and progressive, but negotiable. But if we can get back to that message and we can represent the voters instead of donors, we're going to clean up in the Rust Belt and all across the country. We are going to shock the country in how much Democrats can win.
Along those lines, one of the first things that came to mind for me when I was reading about the Justice Democrats is how are you, and by extension the Young Turks, going to fit into the scheme of, I think I read that you'll be also talking about specific candidates on the Young Turks. When you have the sort of collusion between media and politics already, how do you kind of negotiate that for your own network? Because, some of our readers were pointing out potential, in their minds, conflicts of interest that could be introduced by that. Obviously, you've given this a lot of thought.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about how that should be set up?
So those are all good questions. First off, I am one of the co-founders of the Just Democrats, but the Young Turks are not. Mm-hmm. And the Young Turks as a company, as a show, don't take any position. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm the main host of the show, and I love the Just Democrats, so I'm going to promote them. We're not hiding that at all. We're absolutely clear about it, and a lot of the other hosts also support it. But if a host did not support it, nothing wrong with that at all, and we would immediately allow them on air, and we'd have a good, healthy debate about it, as we have on every issue. We had people supporting Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and we got into vicious debates on the Young Turks.
By the way, that's also true of Truthdig.
Yeah.
We have had the very same debates and the very same kind of disagreements, so this is healthy.
Yeah, and in terms of journalism standards, here's how I view the different standards. It used to be based on objectivity. Actually, before that, it was actually very partisan, the press was in America. Mm-hmm. But objectivity is a perfectly fine standard, and we need objective journalists. Mm-hmm. So we need the Associated Press, Reuters, all of those to collect news for us. But what they tricked us into believing is that the neutrality is same as objectivity. Yeah. And it isn't. Yeah. Neutrality says the Falcons and the Patriots played in the Super Bowl. The Falcons say they won, the Patriots say they won. I guess we'll never find out, right? No, there was an objective score there. Did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? Did he have a connection to 9/11? There was an objective truth there, and instead the press threw up their hands and said, I guess we'll never know, or even worse yet, maybe helped the propaganda in there. So for when we look at the Young Turks, I don't mind any of our hosts taking any political stance that they want, as long as they're clear and upfront with the audience. That includes me, and I think that the reason I helped to start Justice Democrats is because the country absolutely needs this. I didn't see anyone else doing it, so I had to raise my hand.
Yeah, and it seems like, there was a lot of hubbub about content is king a couple of years ago, and now it seems like, especially for news networks, trust is moving to the forefront, so as long as, and we put on our About page, that we are coming from a progressive point of view, so it's out there. It seems like there are ways to negotiate how to make your own political opinions as individuals, but also as a publication, apparent and transparent, without necessarily sacrificing journalistic integrity. And that's one of the things I think that new models of journalism are trying to come up with right now.
And I want to go to this question of fake news, real news, journalistic integrity, and so forth. It seems to me the main thing that has warped our view of the world is, particularly in the national security area, is that we're dependent upon people who don't tell us the whole truth. They can manipulate the data. I'm talking about the CIA, I'm talking about the FBI, the NSA, and so forth. And the weapons of mass destruction, after all, was a lie spread by the government, yes, a Republican government, but it was endorsed by the mass media. The New York Times certainly played a leading role in putting this out there. And what I find ominous about the current situation, I'll be very clear about this, is the narrative is pretty much being written not by whistleblower leaks of people who say, hey, like Edward Snowden did, the NSA is lying to you and so forth, but people who claim to be assessing all this secret data about the Russians, about our election, about everything. They're still in the bowels of the CIA and the NSA and the FBI, and their word is God now. They don't release the whole record. They don't tell us everything they have. They're selectively going through information we're not allowed to see, documents we're not allowed to see. And a lot of liberal people who normally would be suspicious of that process are cheering it on because Trump is on the receiving end. Trump is. And so, hey, any enemy of our enemy is our friend. Well, the CIA is not a friend of democracy. The FBI has not been a friend of democracy, certainly not when it went out to destroy Martin Luther King with its selective data. What I like, and I know you've taken some lumps and been hit over the head and everything, what I like about your stance is you're not easily intimidated. People have
Damn
gone
straight.
after you, they've gone after you, and you've said, screw it. I'll tell you what I think. And I see a real atmosphere both of fear and of opportunism. We can be more hawkish, we can be more, we can go after Putin with great vengeance, we could do this, and we'll hit it. So what you're getting now, that Trump is also being hit from the left, okay? And then what is he going to do? Say, okay, I'll show you, I'll make war over to Ukraine. Or I'll shoot down one of their planes over Syria. That would be, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you want? And so what I'm asking for Justice Democrats are two things. One, are you going to challenge this new Cold War military-industrial narrative, number one? And secondly, are you really going to go after Wall Street and the Democrats on that? Because it was Barack Obama who took Wall Street money and turned down campaign financing. Let's cut to the chase. And the Democrats have been more successful in getting money from Wall Street than the Republicans for all the stuff about the Koch brothers and blah, blah, blah. We demonize the Republican contributors and we celebrate the Robert Rubins and people. So let me just put it to you there.
Yeah. So I'll probably go further than you. So when you talk about Barack Obama and you talk about journalism, he's the one that set this standard in the first place that we're not allowed to have transparency. He claimed that he was going to have the most transparent administration of all time, and what did he do? He was the most aggressive in targeting journalists, charged more whistleblowers with the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined in United States history. So when Trump does it and the establishment is against him, everybody howls, which I'm actually happy about. You should howl about that when he attacks the press. When Obama did it, everybody was like, oh, great, oh, dear leader, please take away our reporters. So all of a sudden they're awakened and they have journalistic standards. Color me a little skeptical about that. I think they just don't like Trump. And if you go back to a regular establishment candidate, by the way, either on the left, like Hillary Clinton type of person, or on the right, like Mike Pence, they're just going to go back to being the subservient establishment press that they are. So on the two issues that you brought up, yes, I mean, it was Eisenhower, by the way, the last Republican to ever balance a budget. The guys who claim that they're for balanced budgets never, ever, ever do. And upon leaving, of course, gave the famous speech about the military-industrial complex. And he warned us about it. He said, look, they're going to get entrenched. They're going to set up the incentive system so that they continue to win. And they did. And then once we allowed money in politics, it was so easy for the defense contractors to buy off the politicians on top of all the generals they buy off. They never talk about that. As soon as the generals retire, they go in and get work at millions of dollars at defense contractors, then they turn around and come back, become our Secretary of Defense. They go be analysts on television. They tell us how wonderful the Abrams tank is and how we absolutely need to go to war. So hell yeah, we're going to fight on that. Part of the Justice Democrats platform is that the Defense Department should go back to what it was intended for, defending us, not for military interventions. We are going to save a ton of money by not doing aggressive, offensive wars anymore, and we're going to spend it on the American people as it was originally intended. So there's a lot of work to do on all those grounds, but we're going to fight back on all that, and we're going to regain the upper hand. And on strength, as usual, on purpose, Democratic politicians lead you in the wrong direction. They say, well, I have to show how strong I am, so I will threaten more war. No, that's not strength. Strength is sticking to your position and saying, I'm going to strongly defend my position. And my position in this case, our progressive position is, look, if somebody comes over and attacks us, we will do our best. And we will defend ourselves more than you could imagine. We've built the greatest military in the history of in the history of the world. But what are we doing in the middle of the Middle East? Why are we intervening there? The American people don't want it based on the polling. And my position is we will not do it if the American people are not in favor of it. So if you don't like that, that's a sad day for you. I look forward to crushing you in an election when you take the pro-military stance.
Cenk, what is the response been to the Justice Democrats so far from Washington circles or outside in general?
So that's a great question because it breaks down into two categories. What is the response in the real world, and what is the response in Washington?
Yeah.
So when I've talked to reporters in Washington about it, look, they to their credit, they're having these conversations. In the past, they wouldn't have even entertained the idea. And I think Bernie Sanders has changed that dynamic. But I could literally see when we're in person, the smirk on their face. And when I'm on the phone, I could hear it in their voice, the skepticism, like, oh, really, right? And so I'm like, hey, God bless, brother. Don't pay attention to it. We'll catch you on during the primaries, okay? So now the audience reaction is wonderful. Within 2 weeks, we'd raised nearly $500,000. And the person who works in the press was like, wow, that's actually more than any Senate candidate would in that period of time. Any Senate candidate. That's kind of amazing. That's presidential candidate level small donor donations. Just small donors. And then
You're only taking small donors.
That's right, only small donors. And we've had over 2,700 people nominated to run for Congress. So we're going to vet those candidates. We're going to be vigilant about who's going to be the best candidate, and we are going to mercilessly primary the Democrats.
So it sounds like you have a lot of support, and because of the Young Turks, because of your celebrity, because of the fan base of the Young Turks, and also the people who are supporting the Justice Democrats. But a lot of our readers are wondering, why run off of a branch of the Democratic Party? Why not start your own party? Because as we saw with the Bernie Sanders campaign, it went really far, it gained a lot of awareness, but ultimately the DNC shut it down. So do you foresee those kinds of issues happening in the future? And one of our readers, actually, Simeon Menso, thank you for tuning in, asks, how long will it take for Justice Democrats to have a real impact in politics? So 2 questions: why run off of a branch of the Democratic Party? And 2, how long do you think it'll take to see change?
Okay, both great questions. So I have very specific answers to that. First, on why not a third party? So we are very practical. This is not an exercise in I'm frustrated, I'd like to do a hashtag movement, etc. No, this is about getting power back so that we could win on policy positions and we can take the country back in the right direction. This isn't about feeling good, this is about actually accomplishing policy objectives. So if you look into that, and I've been covering politics for over 20 years, and I studied this to no end, especially before we set this up. Setting up a third party is prohibitively costly. The infrastructure needed for it is enormous. Just to get on the ballot across the country requires at least $10 million. So it is just, and secondarily, so that's very impractical. So as much as you might want to do it, good luck to you, brother, and I want you to do it, and eventually I think we will set up a situation where that can be done, but today it will be very impractical if you ask me. But secondly, it's just as importantly, the Democratic Party is ours. It's not the corporation's party. So we have every right to take that party back. So from FDR to JFK, that party was the Progressive Party. And right now, it's a mess anyway. It's a ghost ship. It's just sitting there with no soul at all. So we are going to board that ship. We are going to take it over and make it what it always was, the Progressive Party in this country. So there's just no need to do anything but recapture the party that's supposed to represent us anyway.
So let me just put in a little challenge to that. And I'm not objecting to your strategy. I think we all go for the lesser evil, and we all want to be realistic, and we all want to stop the bad guys and so forth. So there's soul searching among ourselves, because I voted for Jill Stein here, and I'm not going to deny it, and I couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton because I thought she was a warmonger, is a warmonger, and that's a deal breaker for me, and her attacks on Stein. But others on our staff, Bill Boyarsky and Bill, well-known political journalists, took the opposite position, and in every family there are these debates. The only reason I want to object to your historical, and welcome to the club, but I've been doing it for 50 years, or so forth, is we have to be reminded there have been good Republicans. There, it was the Republicans were better on civil rights in the South than the Democrats in that post-FDR period. FDR presided over a segregated armed forces. you know, it wasn't just baseball segregated, but the armed forces. And the whole notion of the Democratic Party was the South. You know, now Lyndon Johnson represented a rare break. I don't want to give a whole history lesson. And the Democrats, by the way, have done more fighting of the big wars, unnecessary wars in the post-war period, than the Republicans. For all of our blasting Reagan, he had Grenada, bad scene, but it's a tourist attraction, basically. You know, he didn't do the big ones, you know, and under the Democrats, you get Vietnam, you know. So I just want to put that in as a caution, that yes, challenge the Democratic leadership, fight in the primaries, but I don't think we should whitewash that history. And on one specific issue, and then I'll shut up and say, I blame the Clinton Democrats for the Great Recession. That is a situation, the deregulation came because the Democrats did something the Republicans couldn't do in getting not only Glass-Steagall, but all of that deregulation. They did it with telecommunications. They did it ending welfare, which was the last federal poverty program, but particularly on Wall Street regulation, they are the responsible people. It was the neoliberals, it was Rubin, okay. And so I want to be clear on where you stand on that. I think that's the deal breaker, anyway, for someone like myself.
Yeah. So I view that as when I look at the history of that, I think it's bifurcated. So here's what I mean by that. On domestic policy, I think the Democratic Party was truly progressive through the time period that I was referring to, from FDR all the way to 1980, basically.
Except for race.
Right.
Except for segregation.
In the beginning, but see, then when it gets super complicated because they just switched, right? The Republicans were the liberals and Democrats were the conservatives on race.
Eisenhower, who you mentioned correctly, as a pretty damn good president, also did send the troops to Little Rock. And he did have the FBI go and support the desegregation.
But that's because on that issue, the Republican Party was the Liberal Party back then. That's why it gets complicated. But in foreign policy, so I would argue that certainly since Civil Rights Act, the Democrats were the more liberal party on domestic issues all across the board, okay? And before that, on economic issues. On foreign policy, it's far trickier issue because you had FDR that brought us into World War II, which I think was the right decision, but more interventionist. Harry Truman, and we had the Marshall Plan, which I think was the greatest thing that America's ever done. So we could argue about that, but I love that, and I think we should do that all across the world. But then on the other hand, we had Vietnam with JFK and LBJ.
Well, Harry Truman dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing school children during the day to make an unnecessary point because the war was going to end anyway.
Yes, and that's, there's great debate over that, but I probably largely side with you on that issue. So, but I think that when you talk about the neoliberal positions of Clinton and you get into the modern age of 1978 and beyond, after the Supreme Court decisions, at that point, it is no longer the Democratic Party that had any progressive ideals. From then on, they're just serving their donor class. And so you're absolutely right. Bill Clinton is the one that deregulated the media, so we have this incredible consolidation. He deregulated Wall Street, which led to the Great Recession. But does anybody think that Bill Clinton was not serving his donors? The Robert Rubins of the world? Of course he was. And Barack Obama, a month before the election back in 2008, was literally handed a list of his cabinet appointees from Citigroup. And everyone but one person on that list was exactly his cabinet. Wall Street literally picked Obama's cabinet for him. But if you think about it, back in 2008, Wall Street was the #1 donor class for Barack Obama. His #1 set of donors. So, of course, at that point, they're not remotely progressive. But in the mainstream media, oh my God, Barack Obama's a Marxist, communist, so far left. And that's how they moved the Overton window. So even look at it in our lifetime. Ronald Reagan did amnesty. Blanket, the actual amnesty, not the fake amnesty that they call now. For undocumented workers. Ronald Reagan negotiated with terrorists, literally. Sold arms to Iran. You couldn't possibly, before Bernie Sanders, you couldn't possibly make it out of a Democratic primary if you had those positions in your history. But he's the Republican god. No, they moved the entire window way to the right.
I have a question, bringing it up to the present tense here. With the Justice Democrats and other kind of burgeoning organizations, movements trying to move left politics in different directions, there's been talk of looking to the Tea Party as kind of a, obviously on the other side of the aisle, a success story that could be potentially emulated in some ways. But to me, there seems to be a lot of potential pitfalls involved with that. You know, obstructionism, whether or not you can reach out beyond your bubble and your kind of peer group and groupthink. Is there any concerted or, you know, informal strategy on the part of the Justice Democrats to kind of try to use the Tea Party as something of a model, but, you know, in strategy or in, you know, philosophy in any way?
I don't mind that analogy. I don't really, you know, it doesn't bother me, and I think that the Tea Party was radical and we're not. If you look at the polling on the issues, the Justice Democrats are with the American people on almost 100% of the issues. So, and if you watch TV, they'll tell you we're a center-right country. That is just nothing short of a lie. Otherwise, they're so incompetent they should all be fired immediately because they can't read any poll. Social Security, war, Wall Street, you can't, immigration reform, legalization of marijuana. You can't name an issue that the country isn't center-left on. It's just left-left. It's not even center-left. It's significantly left, exactly where the Justice Democrats are. Whereas the Tea Party, the good thing about them was that they were truly populist for about 3 seconds. So that was great, and there was some real grassroots energy there. And I don't mind that at all. And I'm happy to have that debate with the populists of the right. That's what democracy is supposed to be for. But what happened? They got co-opted immediately and so easily because they're right-wing, so they're authoritarian by nature. So they're like, where do I go, dear leader? Where do I go? And so the Koch brothers pulled up a bus, and it was already painted with anti-Obamacare slogans, and they came with donuts, and they said, now what was the Tea Party started for? To protest the bailouts, right? They never once actually did a protest of the bailouts. Isn't that amazing? But they went straight to the healthcare protests because they got co-opted by the billionaires and tricked like that. So there is that rage, and they are right to be angry, they are right to be populist, but they got hoodwinked immediately.
So let's assume this is the breakfast table and we're all family and friends. Okay. And a part of me wants to say, yes, go get the Koch brothers and so forth. And but what was exciting about the Tea Party movement, and what is exciting about right-wing populism, and I'm not naive about it. I've called Trump a neo-fascist. I think right-wing populism can lead to a Hitler, you know, a Mussolini and so forth. And left-wing populism, it could probably be argued, can lead to a Stalin or someone else. So I understand all of these dynamics from history, and certainly the scapegoating of immigrants and the scapegoating of Muslims and so forth is a precursor to fascism, and no question about it. But there is something incredibly healthy on the right side when they talk about crony capitalism, and that includes the Koch brothers. There's something healthy about saying, okay, if you really believe in capitalism and the free market, let's have one for once, okay? Let's not rig the game, right?
So Bob, you're 100% right, but it's all a lie. So if they were actually against crony capitalism, I'd join them in a second. I hate crony capitalism. But the Koch brothers are absolute liars. The minute that you get into any policy issue, they're like, gimme. They don't have any principles. It's all about all things aimed to help their businesses. In fact, they are the definition of crony capitalists.
I understand, and this I know as the words come out of my mouth that I'm going to have to defend myself with everyone I know for the next 2 weeks, and they're going to tell me what I don't know, an asshole I am. However, I don't want to drop the point. And we may be only talking about 1 or 2% of the country, the principal libertarian and so forth. And we can argue about whether the Koch brothers are exploiting something. Well, we have that on the left too. is George Soros really a great person? And he has very good qualities, but also he has his economic interests. And after all, the people around Robert Rubin and Lawrence Summers, they talked a good liberal game. And in fact, in Congress, the Black Caucus, many of the people in the Black Caucus supported. Jesse Jackson supported the deregulation of Wall Street, and he had a Wall Street program going. So what I'm concerned about is demonization, because it gets in the way of thoughtful discussion of what we face. And as long as we can have the idea that anyone with a big D is somehow better and enlightened and progressive, even if they drop the A-bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, even if they get us into the Vietnam War and lie about it for 10 years, and somehow that gives the folks we know on the Democratic side, Dianne Feinstein is a very good example. I voted for that woman, I think, 3 times or something. And you're right, she's a menace. She's the one that crushed the report on torture, so we still haven't read the torture report. She's the one that blasted Snowden as a traitor. She's awful, and she's actually more effective at being awful than many Republicans, because she can talk a good. So I'm with you, but the problem about the whole lesser evil, which you're going to take on, the problem with the demonization of every Republican, it lets all the Democrats off the hook.
I agree with that, and also, as I was reading over the Justice Democrats, a lot of the platform I agree with, like a minimum wage and some of them more democratic, but you also have the ending of the TPP. And so it seems as though you have certain views that would cater to a Republican voter. And so my question is, going into this, you're already going to have opposition from the Democratic Party, and then you're probably going to have overwhelming opposition from the Republican Party just because of the majority of your platform, and also the name is Justice Democrats. So why not take the approach of, we're going to talk to the Trump supporters, we're going to try to get them on our board, as Bernie Sanders kind of did. I mean, not directly, but as a result, because of, the disillusionment with Trump, with Hillary Clinton, they took the Donald Trump side. So why not take more of I don't want to use the word neutral, but an approach that's a little bit more inclusive? Because what I see with the Justice Democrats, which I really appreciate what you're doing, just as personally, because I think it's great to have this mass campaign more mobilized and active, but it's still divisive, and so
no, it's not. It is and it isn't. So it's a fair point, but so let me address it. So first, let me be clear. When you talk about true libertarians, Bob, I'm with you. We're going to, not only do I think that's very healthy for democracy, I think we're going to get them on our side. I think they will almost certainly vote for us, which goes then to the point that you brought up. Listen, in some ways it's divisive because the Democrats, in their response, the first thing they'll say is, no, let's unify. Don't do this. Don't have fights between the Democrats. Well, what do you mean unify? Unify behind who? Why do I have to unify behind Chuck Schumer? Why don't you unify behind me? Great, I agree, unity, get behind me, right? So, but they won't do that. By unify, they mean unify behind my donors. No, then we don't have a deal. That's what led us to Trump, that's what led us to disaster, that's what led to the gutting of the Democratic Party. No deal. So in that sense, we're divisive because we need to recapture the Democratic Party so that we could have at least someone represent us. But on the other hand, if you read through the platform, again, the American people agree to almost every single thing in that platform, almost overwhelmingly. So will I get more right-wing voters than the normal Democrats? By a landslide, because it's the same Bernie Sanders model. We're going to bring jobs back. We don't agree to giving away our sovereignty to multinational corporations through those trade deals. Guess what? Republicans agree with us. The second issue after getting money out of politics, and by the way, money out of politics, Republicans overwhelmingly agree with us. Yeah. The voters, their politicians are total hypocrite liars, right? But their voters agree with us. And hey, you Republican politicians, you want to argue to keep money in politics? You want to argue for corruption? Great, I'll take all your voters. Great, I love it. Number 2 on our platform is fighting against Wall Street. Dave Bratt beat Eric Cantor in a Republican primary, unprecedented that he beat a leader of that stature in the Republican Party. How did he do it? He ran against Wall Street. I'm going to take all their voters. That's what the Justice Democrats are going to do, and that will actually unite people, and the distinction won't be right-left as much as it is voters versus donors. So Republican establishment, Democratic establishment, you stick with your donors, and we will come and get you.
What will keep Justice Democrats, say you do woo all these voters away from their usual, voting allegiances, What will keep Justice Democrats then from becoming establishment? Is it built into your platform and that you're not going to take big corporate
That's right.
donations?
That's the number one thing on the platform, because money has a corrupting influence. And if you think, well, and we had this debate before we even started it. And I'll be honest, because I thought, look, we cannot take corporate money under any circumstance that will by definition corrupt you. But can we take big donors? And I started that open debate, and I said, maybe we can. There's a lot of good people on the left who are big donors and they mean well, etc. But the rest of the guys, including Bernie's digital team and organizing team that's also part of the Justice Democrats, convinced me otherwise. And part of the reason is, one, it will eventually corrupt, and two, you're in the wrong room. You spend so much time trying to get those big donors to give you money, and you're surrounded by them and you're influenced by them. If you spent the same amount of time trying to raise small donors, one, it's going to be just as effective, and two, you're in the right room. You're in the room with your voters, and you get influenced by them. So that you set up the right incentive structure, you will get the right results. So in our case, we don't allow any big donors so all built on small donors at justicedemocrats.com, and that way we built it right from the beginning.
Okay, and I want to ask one last question because we're running out of time. How will you measure results?
Well, at the end of the day, you got to win. So this isn't about feeling good. So to your earlier question as well, when do we start to expect results? Well, in 2018, we will have a lot of candidates because we already have close to 3,000 nominated. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to run in all 535. Well, obviously in 2018, it won't be 535. It'll be the whole House and a third of the Senate. But we will run a tremendous number of races in 2018. And of course, the Washington folks will snicker and they'll give their snide look and go, oh, yeah, we've seen this before. You won't have enough money. You won't have enough infrastructure. You won't win. And I think we're going to shock the country because we're going to run appealing strictly to voters. And when those corporate robot politicians go out there with their talking points designed for the donors, we are going to rout them. By 2020, I think we're going to start to sweep them clean. I think that the change will be much quicker than people anticipate. Now, you're not supposed to overpromise, right? And then, well, oh my God, what if you don't win enough seats in 2018? But I'm telling you now, this is a tidal wave, this is a tsunami, and they have no idea what's going to hit.
So, and one last question. Do you expect to have this, my question is, do you want the Justice Democrats to eventually take over the Democratic Party, or do you want the Democratic Party to go back to the progressive values that you mentioned before?
So that's the same thing.
Okay.
So we expect a complete surrender.
Okay.
So we are going to defeat them in the primaries.
Complete surrender.
Yes. And once we have defeated them enough in the primaries, you will see the surrender begin. You will have established Democratic politicians raise their hand and go, I will no longer take any big donors. I am now a Justice Democrat. And we will continue to do that until the whole party is back to what it was, which is a progressive, strong party.
Okay, great. I think that's a great place to conclude. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. We're also joined by our deputy editor, Kasha Anderson, and our editor-in-chief, Robert Scheer. I'm your host, Sarah Wesley. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to Live at Truthdig. Every Thursday at 1 p.m., we film live from our office. So thank you again for tuning in. And if you like the video, make sure you share it with your friends. You can click the share button right below. And if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, you can do that now at truthdig.com/subscribe. And of course, we're independent, so we need as much help as we can get. So please donate to truthdig.com/support. Catch you next week.